January 1969. Nixon is inaugurated after a close election. The Republican presidential election of 1968 was between Richard Nixon and George Wallace. It was extremely close, in which Nixon won by 43.4% of the popular vote. Nixon's inauguration was concerning, since it seemed that he lacked a strong electoral mandate and a Republican majority in Congress, making it unclear of his intentions as the president.
July 1969, Nixon introduces the Nixon Doctrine. In his plan, the U.S. would continue to protect its allies from Soviet or Chinese nuclear attacks. The doctrine also included his plan for a Vietnamization of the war in Southeast Asia. It applied to Persian Gulf nations as well due to their importance to the U.S. in terms of major oil deposits. This proved that the Nixon Doctrine was not as effective as assumed to be.
August 1969, Nixon proposes revenue sharing and the Family Assistance Plan. The centerpiece of the new federalism was revenue sharing, in which tax revenues would be distributed to states and local governments, who would be able to spend them any way they wanted. As a result, state and local leaders became more favored of Nixon due to how they gained more funds and had power over how to spend them. To appeal to liberals, Nixon also proposed the Family Assistance Plan. This plan would allow more families to get public assistance and would give a minimum annual income to all poor families if family members worthy of working sought for employment.
July 1970, Nixon proposes the Environmental Protection Agency. He then continued to sign new federal agencies in order to increase the size and power of the government. These agencies included the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, which would protect human health and would safeguard the natural environment.
February 1972, Nixon visits China. Eventually, Nixon decided to visit China in February 1972 with his wife, Pat, where he was determined to establish formal diplomatic relations between the U.S. and China. His visit to China changed U.S. relations with the largest communist nation and was described as eradicating 12,000 miles and 22 years of non-communication and hostility. Relationships between the U.S. and China strengthened as information offices were established in each other's capitals, and full diplomatic relations were made by 1979.
May 1972. Nixon signs the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. The Strategic Limitation Talks, SALT, was created as a 5-year agreement that was later renamed as SALT I, and that limited the USSR missile inventory to 1,618, while limiting the U.S. to 1,054. The missile limit applied to ground-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, as well.
November 1972, Nixon wins a second term. In 1972, Nixon once again won the presidential election. However, this time it wasn't a close election and Nixon won by a landslide. It is said that Nixon's re-election campaign could have been in relation to a burglary on June 17, 1972. Eventually, results from the investigation of the burglary confirmed its ties to Nixon's re-election campaign. This contributed to Nixon's fall from power.
July 1973, Nixon refuses to release White House tapes. After the investigation of the Watergate affair, White House counsel John Dean accused Nixon of covering up White House links to the Watergate break-in through the form of hidden tapes. It was discovered that Nixon recorded every conversation he had in the White House Oval Office through the installment on the recording system. However, Nixon claimed that he had the right to keep the information hidden, otherwise known as executive privilege.
October 1973, Middle East countries stopped shipping oil to the United States. In 1973, oil exporting nations stopped shipping oil to the United States, which resulted in a nationwide energy crisis. This oil embargo was their way of protesting the U.S. support for Israel and conflicts between Israel and Arab nations. Therefore, the government decided to encourage conserving limited supplies by reducing the speed limits to 55 miles per hour on highways and by asking homeowners to stop turning up the heat. However, the ban was eventually stopped the following year by Middle Eastern nations.
August 1974, Nixon resigns as president. Nixon finally announced his resignation on August 8, 1974, to avoid trials and conviction in the Senate, after he was accused of obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and contempt of Congress, as stated in the 3 articles of impeachment that were approved by the House Judiciary Committee in late July.